Welcome back, dear listener, to The World Asleep, where we drift gently across history and possibility, letting the night carry our thoughts to quieter shores. Tonight, we lift our eyes beyond familiar horizons and step into the deep hush of the cosmos. The sky above is a slow ocean of fire and distance, the faint breath of ancient stars, the soft lantern glow of distant worlds, the dark between them like velvet folded over time. In that stillness, a question murmurs with patient wonder. How likely is it that life exists elsewhere? We will wander carefully through what we know, what we suspect, and what we can only imagine, tracing the faint threads that science and story have stitched across the firmament. From the first human gaze that counted constellations to the modern instruments that read the whispers of exoplanets, we'll follow the trail of clues with quiet minds and unhurried hearts. Perhaps we'll not find certainty tonight, only a gentler understanding of the scale that holds us and the possibilities that hum beyond our small blue world. If these calm journeys bring you peace, consider liking and subscribing. It helps this little light keep burning. Tell me where you're listening from and what the night sky looks like there. Now, settle in, let the breath slow and the thoughts loosen. The stars are waiting, and we are ready to float among them. Chapter 1. The Scope of the Universe. Endless Possibilities. Imagine yourself on a quiet hillside at the edge of night, the grass cool beneath your palms, the air carrying a hint of pine and far-off ocean. The earth turns like a slow prayer, and the sky, so patient, so immeasurably vast, unfurls above you. Stars bloom one by one, then by the hundreds, then by the thousands, until the dark itself seems gilded with fire. You can almost feel the light arriving, some of it only a few years old, some of it older than cities and stories, some of it ancient, older than human memory, older than continents reshaped by oceans, older even than the dust beneath your feet. The firmament is not a roof, but an opening, an invitation to let your thoughts float outward, through distances that have no comfortable measure. In this gentle stillness, scale begins to speak. Our home is a planet in orbit around a warm yellow star, itself tucked into a spiral arm of a galaxy so broad it takes that light, steady, unsentimental, tireless, tens of thousands of years to cross from one side to the other. And that galaxy, the Milky Way, is not alone. It is one lacework bead among countless others, drifting in cosmic filaments like dew along invisible threads. Whether we number them in the hundreds of billions or suspect still more beyond the horizon of what we can see, the count is less important than the feeling, an abundance so great that language loosens its grip and simply exhales. People, long before clocks and charts, felt this abundance. Ancient watchers raised stones, carved calendars into cliffs, and leaned their lives against the movement of the sky. In Greece, philosophers pointed at wanderers, planetae, and tried to reckon their dances. In Mesoamerica, astronomer priests aligned pyramids with solstices and eclipses, trusting that meaning was written in the heavens as surely as it was sown in fields. In the high deserts of the Andes, in the river valleys of Mesopotamia, on Pacific islands stitched together by starlight and swell, navigators memorized the sky's grammar. No matter how different their languages or the gods they believed kept vigil above, they shared a quiet astonishment that has never really left us. What else is out there? Who else? For most of history, the eye was our instrument, and imagination our telescope. Then the lenses came, humble at first, a stack of glass and a tube held by unsteady hands, and the sky became not just beautiful, but resolvable. Stars separated into families, faint smudges sharpened into spirals. Catalogues grew heavy with numbers and names. Observatories rose on dry mountains where the air was thin and cooperative. The act of looking changed from devotion to measurement, and yet the old reverence persisted, softening the edges of data. Each improved lens, each new mirror, pushed our seeing farther. Not a boundary in sight, only a horizon that retreated as we approached it. From these vantage points, our picture of the universe gathered texture. We learned that stars are born from the collapse of clouds and die with flourish or quiet, that their ashes seed space with the elements that make stone and water and breath. We learned that planets are not rare family members but expected children of such births. Disks of dust and gas curling into worlds, some scorched, some frozen, some wrapped in envelopes of storm. We discovered worlds around other suns by the smallest betrayals, a star dimming by a hair's breadth as a planet crossed its face, a star's tiny wobble tugged by an unseen companion. Like listening for a heartbeat through a wall, we learned to read what we could not directly observe. And then came the revelation that settled us into a new understanding. In our galaxy alone, the number of stars may be counted not in millions, but in the hundreds of billions. If even a generous fraction of those stars cradle planets, and the evidence suggests that they do, then the number of possible worlds stops being a number at all and becomes a feeling, an unspooling, a music you can't record because it's still being composed. Some of those worlds will be gas giants with storms large enough to swallow Earth. Some will be rocky, tidally locked to their suns, with one face in endless day and one in eternal night. Some will be water worlds with no land, their oceans deep and strange. And among them perhaps, and the word perhaps is both humility and hope, some will be temperate and modest, with atmospheres that breathe, with surfaces that cradle lakes, with chemistries that nudge, molecules toward the dance we call life. It is here, at the intersection of wonder and arithmetic, that possibility begins to feel intimate. We are not talking about an abstract universe of charts and prefixes, but about the conditions that, given enough time and patience, might coax the inanimate toward animation. On Earth, life is not simply a thing that happened once, then clung by its fingernails. It is a habit the planet could not shake once it began. It found ways to thrive in places that seemed hostile even to imagination. Steaming vents at the seafloor where minerals bloom like stalactites. Salt flats where the sun scours away mercy. Glacier hearts that mutter only in winter creeks. Acidic pools that carve a lace of steam into morning air. These small, stubborn successes, extremophiles thriving under pressures and chemistries we once thought prohibitive, whisper a lesson. Life's appetite is broad, its patience long, its creativity unembarrassed. Of course, we are careful with the grammar of hope. We know that Earth's friendliness to life is not a guarantee the cosmos extends to every doorstep. The recipe that led from ocean blankets to thinking minds was complex. A stable star not too fickle with flares, a planetary orbit set within a band where water could remain liquid, a magnetic shield to turn aside high-energy tantrums, geological churn to recycle nutrients, a moon's steadying hand on the planet's tilt, taming climate into long rhythms rather than wild swings, and, most mysterious of all, time. Eons stacked upon eons, a slow stage on which chemistry rehearsed until it discovered what it could become. When we say billions, we're not showing off. We're admitting how long the worlds take to think. Even so, when we let mind and evidence drift together, the odds swell. We do not need every star to host a twin of Earth. We do not even need most of them to host cousins. In an orchard this large with fruit in clusters we cannot count, a modest expectation that some worlds are clement, that some chemistries are adventurous, that some tiny accidents accumulate into complexity, starts to feel less like boldness and more like simple arithmetic. And yet, here is the lovely paradox. the more worlds we can plausibly imagine as bearers of life, the more poignant the quiet seems when we listen for other voices and hear only the hiss of distance. But tonight, in this first chapter, we do not leap to conclusions. We practice a slower seeing. We notice that our galaxy is not a uniform pasture but a landscape. Near the centre, stars crowd shoulder to shoulder, their closeness a chorus of radiation and gravity. In the outskirts, stars thin into spacious neighbourhoods where long orbits are drawn with unhurried hands. Between them run lanes of dust and gas, the raw materials of future suns. The spiral arms, our own Orion spur among them, are not static. They are waves, patterns moving through a sea of stars. If you could hold a candle there, it would burn not in wind but in the drift of time. Beyond the Milky Way lies a local company, dwarfs and companions, the grand Andromeda galaxy gliding in our direction over cosmological centuries, and beyond that, clusters and superclusters stitched into an architecture of filaments and voids. The universe, seen from that unimaginable vantage, resembles roots under a forest or veins beneath a leaf, complexity echoing itself across scales. To walk this architecture in the mind is to feel both astonished and strangely comforted. We belong to a pattern vast enough to be nameless, and yet intimate enough to hold us with the gravity of a lullaby. History too wanders this scale. The Babylonians traced planets into clay. The Maya braided myth and mathematics. Greek thinkers argued in courtyards about spheres and epicycles. Islamic astronomers set instruments upon rooftops and refined the sky's measurements with patient rigour. European stargazers ground lenses by lamplight and wrote to one another with ink still drying, their excitement humming between sentences. Every improvement in seeing has been matched by an improvement in asking. Once, the question was, what are those lights? Then it became, how do they move? Then, what are they made of? And now, in the gentle audacity of our era, what lives in the light we cannot yet see? We have learned, by reading starlight as if it were scripture, to pull from it a planet's hints, its size, its orbit, the way its air, if it has air, might filter light into a signature of gases. Those signatures are not yet confessions, they are suggestions, chords rather than syllables. Still, the method grants us a new intimacy with distant worlds. We can, in a sense, smell their skies with instruments, taste their seasons with equations. Every year, the catalogue of exoplanets swells, and with it, our humility. We have found planets denser than our predictions, lighter than theory anticipated, worlds with days that last hours and years that last days, strange configurations of resonance and companionship, systems that look nothing like home and therefore feel like a broader permission slip for nature's invention. Against this abundance, the human scale does not shrink, it clarifies. A single bee in a garden is not insignificant because there are many gardens. It is more precious because the gardens connect, because the pollinations echo. Likewise, our question, are we alone, is not diminished by the possibility of countless someones. It is rendered more tender. We are not threatened by company we have not met. Instead, we are invited to refine what we mean by we and what we mean by alone. The night deepens, a satellite draws a tidy line, a meteor sketches the briefest exclamation, and is gone. Somewhere, a radio dish turns, listening. Somewhere else, a mirror cools under a black dome, waiting for morning to surrender its data. Here, in our shared quiet, a simpler practice. Breathe in, breathe out, feel the earth cupping you gently while your thoughts ride the star field. Consider what the numbers whisper, that even cautious estimates of star counts and planetary abundance oblige us to take possibility seriously. Not demand, not presume, only take seriously. From this hillside, the path forward becomes clear. If the universe offers so many rooms in its celestial house, the next question is not whether rooms exist, but how some become hospitable. We must ask after water, energy, chemistry, protection, after the way a sky is held to a world and a world held to a star, after the fires beneath crusts, the cycles that replenish seas, the shields that fend off harmful rains of particles. We must learn to recognize the posture of a habitable place, even from light years away. And so, with our eyes adjusted and our scale recalibrated, we will rise from the hillside and step toward the practical tenderness of criteria. The universe is large, that we know, but largeness alone does not guarantee company. The next whisper along the path is gentler and more exacting. What does life need? What makes a planet not merely possible but welcoming? What balances must hold? What safeguards must persist for chemistry to lean toward breath? Beyond this ridge of stars, another secret waits. The quiet rules of habitability, the Goldilocks balances, the shields and circulations that turn rock and water into a cradle. Let us walk there together. Chapter 2. The Conditions for Life. What makes a planet habitable? Imagine a small, quiet world turning through a gentle dawn. Frost pearls along the shadowed hollows, then loosens into beads that slip toward a pale, awakening sea. Clouds, thin as breath, gather over mountains whose names no mouth has ever spoken. The star above rises with a warmth neither too austere nor too fierce. Its light drapes the planet in a measured kindness. Somewhere along a rocky shoreline, minerals mingle with salt, and waves keep time against a patient shore. You listen because the scene is not loud, and what you hear is balance. Not perfection, but balance. Energies arriving and departing, temperatures climbing and falling, waters circulating and returning. A place like this could cradle life, not because it is Earth, but because it performs a quiet music we recognize as hospitable. Humanity learned to hear this music slowly. Long before spectrometers and models, we intuited that some lands were generous and others spare. We planted valleys and avoided deserts, built where rivers declined into fertile plains, learned to read the sky for storms and seasons. In that old intimacy with weather and soil lived the earlier sense of habitability, that life thrives where conditions are neither too harsh nor too indulgent, where change is real but not ruinous, where cycles repeat without becoming prisons. In time, as our gaze lifted from fields to firmament, we translated those homely lessons into celestial questions. If Earth could bear such abundance, did other worlds possess their own temperate covenants? The first modern answer arrived in a phrase simple enough to sound like a child's story: the Goldilocks zone. Not too hot, not too cold, just right. But the phrase, for all its sweetness, conceals a rigorous intuition. Around every star is a band where a rocky planet, given a particular kind of atmosphere, can sustain liquid water on its surface over long spans of time. Move inward, and heat unfastens the bonds of water into steam, drift outward, and cold shackles the same water into ice. The exact width of this just right band depends on the star's temperament. Blue-white giants burn bright and brief, too impatient for life's slow rehearsals. Red dwarfs glow long and dim, but their fits of magnetic weather can be unruly. Sun-like stars, steady, long-lived, neither meagre nor extravagant, offer a patient stage on which chemistry can attempt the audacious. Yet habitability is not a single ring painted on the floor of the cosmos. It is a choreography of factors, each leaning on the others. Water, yes, because on Earth it dissolves, carries, cushions, and remembers. But water alone is not the play. It is the theatre, Within it, elements must circulate and meet. Carbon's versatile spine, nitrogen's quiet service in the air and in the architecture of proteins, oxygen's fierce generosity in combustion and breath, phosphorus, sulfur, a garden of metals in trace and tincture. Together they provide the alphabet from which life spells itself. Where do these letters come from? From stars that lived and died before ours, scattering the periodic table into the interstellar medium like seeds across fallow ground. A habitable world, then, is heir to an older fertility, the alchemy of prior suns. Consider next the atmosphere, the invisible garment a world chooses or is given. Too thin, and precious heat leaks away. Too thick, and pressure and warmth conspire towards sterility. Composition matters as much as quantity. Carbon dioxide traps heat, a kindness in moderation, a tyranny in excess. Methane sings the same song in a higher key. Oxygen, reactive and eager, must be tempered by partners lest it burn the playhouse down. An atmosphere also shields a surface from a star's harsher moods, dispersing high-energy radiation and softening the blows of cosmic debris. It carries winds that ferry moisture inland, turns deserts into steppe and steppe into forest, and returns rain to rivers that return again to sea. Without such cycles, a world can be beautiful and still be barren. Beneath the air, stone must move. Geological rest is a kind of death. On Earth, the crust fractures into plates that drift like lily pads over the mantle's slow convulsions. Where plates meet, mountains rise, oceans open, volcanoes exhale. This restlessness is not chaos, it is a circulatory system. Volcanism disgorges gases that nourish atmospheres. Weathering binds carbon into rock. Subduction drags old crust into heat where it releases its burdens to be exhaled again. Through these exchanges, temperatures are moderated over eons. Nutrients reach the sea. New land presents fresh laboratories for living experiments. A habitable world, then, is not only located correctly in the sky, it is metabolically alive. Turn the planet in your hands and ask about magnetism. Deep within, a molten core stirs, its movement generating a magnetic field that arcs outward like a protective cloak. Charged particles streaming from the star are shepherded away. The upper air is spared from erosive scouring. Where the field meets the wind, auroras write stories in light and colour, a visible testament to an invisible kindness. A world without such a field may still bear life in special refuges, beneath rock, under water, inside ice. But the open surfaces where photosynthesis might spread its green embroidery become less secure. Now widen your view and attend to companionship. A moon can steady a planet's tilt, keeping seasons in a narrow rhythmic dance instead of a wild reel. Tides need shorelines, stir shallow seas, mix nutrients. Gas giants, if placed with decorum, can serve as guardians, their gravity gathering or deflecting stray comets and planetesimals. But let such companions stray too close, and their influence deforms or devastates. The architecture of a planetary system, its resonances, distances, and rhythms, can nurture or undo the conditions we seek. All of these considerations, quietly enumerated in laboratories and observatories, return again and again to the same touchstone: time. Not the stingy time of minutes and months, but the indulgent, forgiving time of hundreds of millions and billions of years. Life, as we know it, is not a sudden blossom, but a patient moss advancing over stone. Habitable is not a moment, it's a commitment. A star must remain stable, a planet must keep its water, the cycles must continue without catastrophic interruption, too frequent or too severe. In such long spans, accidents accumulate into patterns, and patterns become the habits of living. Having listened to the music of requirements, we should also honour the counterpoint. Perhaps life does not always sing in water's key, under nitrogen blue skies, upon continents that trade places. Perhaps elsewhere chemistry dreams differently. On Earth, extremophiles crowd the margins and annex them. Organisms dining on sulphur at boiling vents, sleeping for centuries in Antarctic brine, repairing the insults of radiation, making a home in acid. They are not exceptions to life's rule. They are demonstrations of life's appetite. Each is a postscript at the edge of a page that says, in small, insistent script, do not underestimate. When we imagine habitable worlds now, we do not confine ourselves to earthly clones. We picture ice-roofed oceans warmed from below, deserts with subsurface aquifers, cloud decks on Alien, worlds where droplets might cradle chemistry, lakes of liquid methane that, though frigid to us, are rivers of possibility to some hypothetical stranger. And yet, however broad our imagination, we must measure with care. The Goldilocks zone is wider or narrower depending on how a planet's atmosphere behaves, how clouds form, how light reflects, how greenhouse gases accumulate or are drawn down. A planet too close to its star might yet be cool if its clouds are bright and enduring. A planet further out might still be temperate if a thicker, kinder air holds heat like a shawl. Subsurface oceans may ignore the stellar distance entirely, warmed by tidal kneading or radioactive patience. Habitability is not only a place on a ruler, it is a personality, a set of negotiations between star and stone and air and time. Our tools have grown attentive to these negotiations. We watch stars for the faintest dimming that reveals a planet's transit. We measure the delay and advance of starlight to infer a planet's mass and orbit. We pry apart the light that filters through an alien sky to search for gases that, in combination, hint at something breathing below. None of these signatures is decisive alone. Oxygen can be made by light unbraiding water. Methane can seep from rock. Carbon dioxide is a backdrop. But compositions can conspire toward meaning. An atmosphere out of chemical balance, where gases persist together that ought to quickly undo each other, may be a world with metabolism. Here our language softens into maybe an if, not reluctance, but respect. We are learning to read the margins of messages addressed to no one and everyone at once. History presents its own curriculum of habitability through cautionary tales and consolations. Venus, our near twin in size and birth, shows what a runaway greenhouse can orchestrate. Clouds of sulfuric acid, a surface hot enough to soften metal, pressures that crush. Mars, once braided with rivers that wrote deltas into its skin, is now a whisper of air over cold deserts, its water retreated to polar cap and subsurface gloom. Earth, between these sisters, holds a tension so delicate we can feel it in our breath. We learn from them not despair but grammar, how small changes on planetary scales flower into destinies. We learn that habitability is neither granted nor permanent. It is negotiated, maintained, sometimes lost. Pause here and notice the symbolism curled within the science. A habitable place is, at heart, a practice of moderation and renewal. It is patience, openness to change, and a refusal of extremes. It is protection without imprisonment, energy without frenzy, cycles that repeat but do not stagnate. In this mirror we can glimpse our own lives, the way we keep our days temperate, our communities shielded and porous, our resources circulating rather than hoarded. The planet that hosts life is not a fortress. It is a conversation between fire and water, between rock and air, between the restless core and the quiet sky. When we ask what makes a world welcoming, we're really asking how anything sustains the conditions for flourishing without consuming itself. And still, after listing all these graces, a gentle star, a patient orbit, a breathing sky, a stirring geology, a magnetic veil, companions that do not domineer, and the long, long blessing of time, we must admit a final humility. Even when the scales are balanced and the stage well lit, life may not arrive. Chemistry is an opportunist, but it is also choosy. It may require the right shoreline with the right tide pools, the right mineral scaffolds, the right cycles of wet and dry, the right accidents to be repeated often enough to cease being accidents. The origin is a threshold we cannot yet cross with certainty. We can describe promising rooms in the cosmic house. We cannot guarantee what guests will come to live there. This is not a cause for disappointment. It is an invitation to precision. Each new exoplanet we discover, hot Jupiters grazing their stars, super-Earths striding close in or wide, mini-Neptunes wearing cloaks of vapour, expands our laboratory. Each atmosphere we scent from afar teaches us to distinguish weather from climate, promise from pretense. Over time, we will refine our ear for the music of habitability until perhaps a chord reaches us that sounds unmistakably like a living refrain. For now, let us hold in the same quiet breath two truths that seem to pull in opposite directions. Life is resilient and resourceful, and the conditions that invite it are exacting and rare. Between those truths a question blooms, the one our next steps must address. If the universe contains so many stars with so many possible worlds, and if some of those worlds surely perform this delicate music of water, air, warmth, and time, why then do we not already hear choirs? Perhaps we have not listened long enough. Perhaps our ears are tuned to one register, while other voices sing in another. Perhaps intelligence itself is not a frequent blossom, or if it blooms, it does so briefly, a wildflower between long winters. Or perhaps silence is not silence at all, but distance, patience, or a language we have not learned. Beyond this shoreline of criteria, another headland waits, a place where hope meets paradox. We have traced the balances that make a world welcoming. Now we must step into the quiet puzzle that greets us when we raise our listening dishes and mirror eyes to the sky and receive from everywhere and nowhere only the hush of long distances. In that hush lies a famous question, asked by a physicist over lunch and echoed ever since. If the garden is so vast and the conditions so often right, where is everyone? Let us walk there together. Chapter 3. The Fermi Paradox. Where is everyone? Night gathers like a slow tide, and the stars sharpen into their winter clarity. You lie back and listen to the long hush between the points of light. Somewhere, a jet writes a temporary line that fades. Somewhere else, a satellite moves like a second hand across a deep clock. Yet beneath all this motion, the sensation is stillness. If the universe is an orchard beyond numbering, if worlds hang from branches we cannot count, why do we hear only the wind? The question arrives without anger, almost shyly, as if embarrassed by its audacity. Where is everyone? This is the riddle we call the Fermi Paradox, named for the physicist who reportedly asked it over lunch with the ease of someone pointing out an elephant in an empty room. In that simplicity there is an elegant disquiet. Grant the premises we have now made almost ordinary. There are many stars like the sun. Many of them host planets. Some fraction of those planets lie within temperate bands. Life, at least on one world, can begin. Under the opulent blessing of time, some leaves may become curious, clever, technological. Given cosmic timescales and the slow patience of physics, one civilization with a head start of 1,000,000 years, a blink against the age of galaxies, might sow its presence like dandelion clock seeds across the stars. And yet the evidence at our scale remains unromantic. No unambiguous signals, No lights in the neighbouring dark that we did not ourselves kindle. No artifacts glittering in the sky when we look up and say ours. The silence is not new, but now we can name it. Humans have woven silence into story before. Ancient watchers told of gods who withdrew to high places, of spirits who observed but refrained from speaking, of teachers who chose to wait for the pupil to ask the right question. But the silence that troubles us now is a more technical stillness, a refraining measured in decibels and bits, in telescopes aimed at well-behaved stars, in radio spectra cleared of human interference and sifted for patterns. We make ourselves a ritual of listening. We sharpen the algorithms. We stretch a net of mirrors and dishes and software across the night, and find, repeatedly, that the sea flows through unhindered. What might explain this hush? Theories collect like shells at the tide line, lovely and incomplete. Some suggest that life is common but intelligence rare, that chemistry everywhere finds ways to move and metabolize. But the step from problem solving to planetary industry is a narrow bridge most worlds never cross. Perhaps most biospheres are choirs of bacteria, lush and untroubled by cities. Intelligence, in this telling, is not inevitable, but eccentric, an improvisation in a single cove, not a chorus written into the score of nature. Others propose a different narrowness, not intelligence itself, but longevity. Civilizations rise from their soils and seas, whisper to their skies, and discover powers that both cradle and imperil them. They learn to draw fire from atom and algorithm, to match their hunger to the planet's storehouses, to multiply voices until governance becomes a symphony or a din. They might travel, or wish to, but face distances that require more patience than politics can reliably supply. Some burn briefly and brilliantly, then dim, leaving behind, at best, fossils of radio and debris rings, and at worst, silence that returns their sky to innocence. If most civilizations are short-lived, the odds of any two overlapping in the same neighborhood of space-time shrink into a melancholy arithmetic. The lights pass one another in the fog and never know. Between these two visions, a universe lively but simple, and a universe intermittently clever but fleeting, lies the suggestion of a barrier we call the Great Filter. It may be behind us, the first trick so fiendishly unlikely that passing it once in a galaxy is cause enough for celebration. Or it may be ahead, hidden in the road of technological growth like a trap set by physics or by our own tendencies. The Great Filter might be a peaceful bottleneck, energy limits, light speed's refusal to negotiate, the mathematics of expansion in a galaxy that does not wish to be overrun. Or it might be a tragic one, the difficulty of guiding power with wisdom over centuries. The thought that the filter lies behind us is consoling. The thought it lies ahead is a candle that needs watching. There are gentler explanations. Perhaps the voices are there, but they're not singing at our frequency. Not all minds choose radio as their flag. We listened first because we had built transmitters for ourselves, because radio was our adolescence, the voice cracking as it grows into strength. But another intelligence might speak in neutrinos, in modulations of starlight, in cloaked lasers so tight that they thread only a single system at a time, or in engineering that looks like nature from afar. Even on Earth, bioluminescence writes letters we cannot see without leaving our surface. The whales hymn at depths where we need machines to hear them. If another civilization makes a biosphere their instrument, their communications might be local, intimate, unspectacular at distance. From light years away, a world full of conversation could appear mute. There is also the possibility of choice, the quiet by intention. In one story, often called the zoo hypothesis, older cultures notice young ones, like us, fledgling, loud, curious, not yet past the stage where we talk over our elders and forget to listen. Perhaps they have adopted a rule of non-interference, a benevolent patience to let children grow without framing their world too soon. It is a story both flattering and cautionary, a myth that recasts our loneliness as a lesson in autonomy. In another story, darker in temperament, the forest is not a zoo, but a hunting ground. Silence is survival. Those who shout announce themselves to mouths they cannot see. In this dark forest reading, the universe is full, but most life keeps its fire low and its songs quiet. We do not need to accept this anxiety to respect the prudence it models. When we do eventually speak outward with purpose, what tone will we choose? Distance itself is an explanation that needs no myth. The nearest sun-like star is over 4 light-years away, close enough in metaphor to call a neighbour, far enough that with current ships it is an epical voyage. The Milky Way is more than 100,000 light-years across. If someone waved from the other side when our species first traced ochre hands on cave walls, their greeting would still be swimming toward us, only halfway. Even messages travelling at light speed are subject to the calendar of distance. Dialogue in such a universe becomes correspondence by courier, a letter every generation. Misunderstandings persist. Patience becomes not virtue but necessity. If there are signals, they may be in transit. If there are artifacts, they may lie where we have not looked, in wavelengths to which our instruments are indifferent, or in orbits we have not yet canvassed. Silence in this light is not a verdict but a statistical pause. We might also suspect our own expectations. We look for signatures that we know how to make. We imagine cities with nightlight and satellites making tidy rings, pollutants in alien air that mirror our industrial adolescence, flashes in radio that carry the cadence of constructed orders. But another lineage might skip our steps. They might never discover combustion because their planet offered tides that did the lifting we asked of engines. They might encode their memory in mineral lattices beneath their oceans, conduct their philosophies in migrating electric storms, build machines that wear the camouflage of coral reefs and forests. Techno-signatures in such a world would be unlike our first thoughts. We could be like sailors skimming a coastline in fog, missing a harbour because we expect marble when the city's made of wood. Underneath the hypotheses runs a current of human feeling. The Fermi Paradox tugs at our private fears and hopes. It stirs loneliness, the suspicion that our questions may have no witnesses but ourselves. It stirs relief, the secret wish that there be no older empire to make us provincial. It stirs humility, the recognition that our instruments, for all their brilliance, are young and learning. And it stirs most of all a softer willingness to remain the question without forcing it to answer on our schedule. The quiet is not an accusation, it is a condition of our vantage. History shows that silence is not empty in the way we often think. Before we discovered the faint dimming of a star as a planet crosses, the light curves looked like noise. Before we learned to separate spectra into their elemental tails, starlight was only brightness. Before we built the patient baselines that reveal a star's wobble, motion hid in plain sight. Again and again, we have transformed silence into signal by refining our attention. Perhaps the paradox is not an unsolvable riddle, but an invitation to deepen our listening. Not louder, but finer. Not broader, but wiser. Not more frantic, but more patient. Think of the deep ocean on our own planet, unvisited for most of human time. Think of the microbial realms that live in and on us, invisible until we devised the lenses and dyes that could greet them. Think of the first time someone heard the tremor of a distant earthquake, or the faint rhythmic echo of a heart through a mother's skin. The world did not become more full when we noticed. Our noticing became more subtle. We're at a similar threshold with the sky. New instruments are rising onto mountaintops and unfolding their petals in orbit. New methods are being taught to the patient calculus that sifts data like sand. Already, we have learned to taste an exoplanet's atmosphere through the light of its star, to suspect clouds and winds where no human foot will ever stand. Tomorrow, meaning years and decades, we may learn to catch the breath of photosynthesis in a distant mix of gases, or the exhale of industry, or the soft, persistent signature of technology that prefers not to shout. And if, after all this, the night remains quiet, then we will have learned to carry the quiet differently. We will not treat it as a verdict but as a landscape feature, like the long calm between waves in a gentle sea. Perhaps the music of life in the universe is less a chorus and more a set of distant solos, each sung in its own cove, overlapping only faintly. Or perhaps the choir exists, but we are early to the cathedral. The universe is young compared to its future. The lights that will someday shine have not yet found their fuel. In such a frame, our task is to keep our lamp tended and our door open. There is a final possibility worth holding with humility, that the paradox bears our own shape. We ask, where is everyone? With the assumption that we would be able to recognize everyone when we saw them. But life may not be a face we can name across a room. It may be a slow intelligence that thinks in glacier speeds, a distributed mind braided through the roots of a forest, a conversation among storms on a gas giant, a choral of machines on a comet that measure centuries by the rhythms of sublimation and return. Intelligence could be quieter than we expect, closer to prayer than proclamation. If so, we have not yet invented the ears to hear it. The stars keep their unhurried vigil. Somewhere, a dish turns. Somewhere else, a mirror cools and counts. Here, breath returns to its gentle cadence. The paradox remains, not a wall, but a window. It reminds us that the universe's generous scale is matched by an equally generous patience, and that our methods, though earnest, are young. It asks us to refine our questions, to widen our notions of communication and presence, to consider not only the possibility that others are absent, but that our ways of looking are provincial. And so the path bends toward imagination, disciplined by evidence, but not shamed by wonder. If the question, where is everyone, remains unanswered, another question steps forward with a lamp in its hand. What might life be like when it is not like us? What forms might chemistry assume under different suns and gravities? What motions would signify thought in oceans without surface, in skies without ground? What stranger beauties might count as home? Beyond this ridge of paradox another landscape opens, one of ice-roofed seas, cloud kingdoms, sulphur rains, methane rivers, and organisms whose habits would make us laugh in delight for their audacity. Let us walk there together, softly, and see what shapes life might wear when the cosmos dresses it in unfamiliar cloth. Chapter 4. Life Beyond Earth. What could it look like? Imagine a sky the colour of brass, its clouds heavy with unfamiliar chemistry. Rain does not fall here in the way we expect. It beads and hovers, then drifts sideways, dissolving into a haze that smells of minerals and lightning. Beneath this sky, the ground is not ground at all but a patient sheet of ice, grooved by the slow pulse of tides you cannot see. In the black water below, mountains move, ridges of frost and salt that crawl as if breathing. Something brushes past in the dark, not a fish, not quite a plant, a filament, a lantern, a veil of living lace that tightens and then relaxes, drawing from vents that flower with heat, metals, and possibility. You press a palm to the ice. You feel nothing. But that is the surface's secret. Life could be a whisper just beneath our touch, busy in the dark, needing no sunlight except the memory of it stitched into chemistry long ago. We did not always grant such worlds the courtesy of our imagination. For centuries, life wore a single outfit in our minds: green leaves, familiar lungs, eyes made for daylight. Then Earth surprised us with crowded margins. At the scalding mouths of hydrothermal vents, where the ocean makes pillars of minerals and breathes clouds of black smoke, communities flourish around energy drawn from stone rather than sun. In caves where water is battery acid sharp, slim strands knit together in patient tapestries. In the Antarctic's brines, microbes sleep for centuries, waking to nibble at salt and light like careful misers. In deserts under rocks, in reactor pools humming with radiation, in the lungs of glaciers and the petty oceans between sand grains, life refuses our definitions of too much and not enough. Each discovery of an extremophile became a key, unlocking doors in our heads that we had not noticed were locked. If Earth can be so inventive under pressure, cold, heat, poison and dark, then perhaps elsewhere invention is the rule rather than the exception. So our atlas of possibility widened. We learned to imagine the ocean beneath Europa's ice, warmed not by sun but by the kneading of tides as Jupiter's gravity plays a slow, deep music through the moon's brittle shell. We pictured vents like the ones at Earth's seafloor, gardens of sulfur and iron, where chemosynthetic life might write its quiet equations into chains of carbon. Enceladus joined the conversation with jets of water erupting from its south pole, a fountain writing commas and exclamation points into the vacuum, hinting at salts and organics. Titan, with its lakes and rain of liquid methane, invited questions in the key of cold. Could membranes form from hydrocarbons? Could metabolism find a foothold at temperatures where water is stone? Venus, once our near twin in size and birthplace, offered a different speculation. Within clouds of sulfuric acid, where pressure and temperature pass briefly through the comfortable, could chemistry find a way to insist upon itself? Even if only briefly, even if only in forms that challenge our kindness toward the word life. Mars, the old red storyteller, showed us dry riverbeds and minerals that remember water, whispers of ancient habitability, and perhaps a presence sparse and subterranean, cryptic niches below the killing ultraviolet light, where microbes, if they exist, keep their secrets like monks. These are the canonical destinations for imagination as well as instruments, but the cosmos insists we travel further. Gas giants with cloud decks that roll and boil might host life that never sees a surface, organisms buoyed by convection, bodies built from foam and polymer, bones made of electric fields and exoskeletons of charge. Their days would be the time between lightning and lightning. Their seasons would be the long migration updraft and downdraft. On worlds with shallow seas that encircle continents of salt, life might fabricate shells of sodium crystals, latticed like snowflakes, dissolving and reforming with the tides. On water worlds without land at all, evolution could make bodies that are also boats, rafts that catch and hold light, communities braided into living sargassos that drift, divide and rejoin over centuries. We're used to the idea of cells, those tiny compartments of intention. But a cell is a strategy, not a law. On worlds rich in clays, life might be templated upon mineral surfaces first, borrowing stability before graduating to its own membranes. In thick atmospheres, fogs of living aerosol could form, droplets that house chemistry, dividing when winds shear them, merging when humidity invites reunion. In the porous rock beneath an exoplanet's plains, a labyrinth of capillaries could host a single organism worn through stone, an entire continent thinking in slow, osmotic pulses, learning its environment by how quickly it swallows and yields. If the primary solvent is not water but methane or even supercritical carbon dioxide, structures would be slower, reactions more deliberate. Lifetimes might stretch into spans that make our histories feel feverish. We may even have to let go briefly of organism as a singular actor. Life could be a field, a pattern, a recurring wave. Picture a planet where day and night last for months across its terminator, the great, migrating border between light and dark. Storms of charged particles ignite auroras that march around the globe. On that ribbon of moving light, reactions could ignite in a cascade, a ring-shaped intelligence pacing the planet, never in one place for long, thinking in echoes and harmonics. Or think of a moon where tides are brutal, rising like cliffs and falling like princes. In its intertidal deserts, chemistry could ride the wet-dry cycles not as a hardship but as a heartbeat. The waxing and waning of a mind that only exists in the act of becoming, a thought that is a tide pool. Do we stray too far, loosening our definitions until they fall apart? Perhaps. But the discipline of astrobiology is not to assert that anything goes. It is to map the borderlands of the possible with the pencils of physics and chemistry. We ask again and again, where is there free energy to be harvested? What scaffolds are available for structure? How can information be stored and copied with enough fidelity to resist entropy, and with enough error to evolve? These are not Earth's questions only. They are questions of any universe where order arises from availability. When we imagine Titan's cold chemistry, we are not indulging in fantasy. We're translating these questions into a different temperature and set of solvents. When we picture air plankton in the clouds of a gas giant, we're asking how buoyancy, light and charge might be recruited into a metabolism's toolkit. Yet, for all this disciplined dreaming, a gentle humility remains. We have only one biography of life. Every analogy we make, every hypothesis we sketch, is at some level a parable of Earth. Our microbes teach us, our forests hint, our reefs and vents and deserts and snows lend metaphors and equations. We try to escape our provincialism by multiplying Earth's lessons, by visiting the edges where life stretches and knits itself anew, by noticing how often it borrows geology and weather as collaborators. And in doing so, we create a grammar broad enough to speak across worlds. Energy, structure, information, time. Listen then to a more intimate speculation. Suppose we melted a hole through Europa's ice and lowered a craft into the black. Its lights would be needles in velvet. It would drift toward a plume of warmth, and the cameras would fill with bits of the ocean's own snow, flakes of minerals, shreds of ice. Something would move with intention, we would tell ourselves, even if the intention is only the physics of flow. But what if, as our instruments sniff the water, we taste gradients that shift with the regularity of metabolism? What if we find polymers that repeat with more pattern than chance allows? What if we hear, in the data, cycles that persist because they are copied, because they are useful? Would we call that life? Or would we wait, holding out for a familiar body plan, a flagellum, something with a face? Picture Titan again. The lakes are satin dark, wrinkling under a wind too slow to feel like wind to us. Along pebbled shores of plastic rock, droplets hang in the air longer than raindrops should, and then join, splitting and rejoining, forming films. The films, rich in strange lipids, bulge and contract. They shiver when sunlight, weak but persistent, wanders through their haze. In laboratories back on Earth, probes return with stories of repeating units, nested forms, properties that look like almost membranes, almost catalysts, almost inheritance. Here is the temptation of the word prebiotic, a way to honour the movement toward life without granting it citizenship. But perhaps our categories are too rigid. Perhaps what we will meet beyond Earth are not citizens but pilgrims, journeys rather than destinations, systems on the slope where chemistry becomes history. And what of worlds older than ours, circling long-lived stars where time unfolds with generosity? If intelligence blooms there, given speed limits and distances, maybe they send no ships at all, only gardens, packages of instruction designed to awaken native chemistry into cooperation. Not panspermia as seeding, but as teaching. A gentle nudge to catalyse what wants to happen anyway. In that case, life elsewhere could look like ours not because it shares a parent, but because it shares a curriculum. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, the same alphabet used to write different poems. There is, too, the possibility that life, or something that deserves a respectful new word, might be written in physics more than chemistry. Imagine beings that collect in planetary rings, dust and ice grains whose collisions, governed by electric charge and gravity, give rise to stable vortices that persist and interact, patterns that store history in spin states and radial spacing. Over millennia, these vortices learn, in a sense, by surviving. Their interactions produce emergent dynamics that are not random, that anticipate, that adapt. They are not alive as we define it, but they are not dead in any ordinary way. If such minds existed, they would not shout in radio. They would speak in the choreography of particles around a planet, a dance we might mistake for simple physics unless we knew where to look for the signature of intention. The farther our imagination travels, the more a gentle rule returns to guide us. Look for persistence shaped by feedback. Life is a way of being that resists decay by making use of flow. It learns to regulate, to compartmentalize, to edit and remember. Whether in a droplet, a cloud, a stone's pour, or a planet's ring, it is the curve carved against entropy by a system that continually rebuilds itself from what passes through it. Seen this way, the cosmos is not hostile. It is full of currents that can be harnessed by the right loops and latches. The art is discovering which loops are possible under which suns. How would we recognize such art from light years away? Our instruments, the patient readers of starlight, have begun to trace atmospheres as if they were signatures. An excess of oxygen might be a world of trees, or it might be photolysis without the hand of leaves. Methane might spell cows and swamp, or simply speak of rock and heat. But combinations can begin to say unlikely in the way that life often is. Gases that should cancel each other yet persist. Seasonal oscillations that mirror growth and rest. Hints of pigments that select certain colours of light. The spectral fingerprints of molecules used by life for its business. Isoprenoids, chlorophyll cousins, odd polymers that reflect more like shell than cloud. There will be false positives and false negatives, moments when we think we hear a choir and it is wind through pipes, moments when a choir sings in a register our ears have not yet learned to hear. But this is not cause for despair. It is the ordinary labour of learning a new language. And perhaps, in that learning, we will find that our own definition of life softens its edges, becomes less a gate and more a garden, less a passport and more a path. This symbolism is reluctant to stay quiet. When we picture life that floats, we think of ideas buoyed by community. When we picture life in the dark, we think of resilience that does not need applause. When we picture slow minds that measure centuries with tides, we think of patience we rarely practice. The landscapes we imagine beyond Earth turn out to be mirrors, not because they're human, but because we recognize in them ways of enduring, to take what is given, to make it into something that persists, to improvise dignity. And yet, even if we were to stand before an ocean under another sky and watch a veil of living lace draw itself like a curtain across event's glow, a trembling wonder would remain. Could we talk to it? Could we ever bridge the intervals of chemistry, habit, and time? Life that is not like us invites reverence, but intelligence. Not merely reaction, not merely adaptation, but attention that turns outward adds the ache of possibility. If such attention appears elsewhere, it may not choose speech, it may not care for messages, it may be content with listening. Which brings us gently to a threshold we've been circling all along. We have imagined forms and strategies, rehearsed scenes and solvents. We have granted that life may be tougher and stranger than our catalogues and may thrive in rooms we barely know how to enter. But if there is mind in those rooms, if some of those vales and fields and rafts and rings look outward with curiosity, could we ever meet, if only across the distance of light? How would we know a greeting if it arrived? What signals would we dare to send? What ears would we need to build? And what patience would we need to grow to hear an answer? Beyond this chapter's edge, the hum of instruments grows louder, the turning of radio dishes, the long stare of telescopes that pass starlight syllable by syllable. The search has a name and a history. Its nets are woven of mathematics and hope. The oceans may be crowded with possibilities, but if there is a voice among them, we must learn how to listen without assuming we already know the words. Let us step there now, softly, into the rooms where people tend machines that listen to the night, waiting for the universe to clear its throat. Chapter 5. The search continues. SETI and the quest for signals. Night has its instruments. In lonely valleys and on dry high plateaus where air is thin and patient, great bowls of metal tilt their faces to the dark. They listen. They listen with a devotion that feels almost monastic. A single ear held to the sky for hours, days, years, harvesting the faintest murmurs that slide through the interstellar hush. Inside control rooms lit by soft monitors, people watch waterfalls of data pour down screens like glacial streams, cold, clear, and full of stones that might be gems. The dishes creak as they track. The computers hum like bees. Outside, a wind combs the grasses, and somewhere far away a coyote makes its thin silver sound. The universe answers with static, hiss, whisper, roar. And in that music, the listeners hope for a note out of tune with nature, a line that looks arranged rather than accidental, a pattern that might be a greeting from another shoreline of time. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence, SETI, did not begin with machines, though machines would become its necessary prayer beads. It began with a realization that the laws of physics are stingy but consistent. Electromagnetic waves cross space without tiring. Radio, with its long wavelengths, can thread dust that stymies light and travel across gulfs where no ship can yet go. In the mid-20th century, as humanity's own radio blossoms spilled from cities into skies, a few minds asked a simple, startling question. If we, by accident, have made a planetary shout, might others be doing the same, by design or by their own unintentional exuberance? And if so, could we, by listening deliberately, catch the echo of a civilization we'll never meet? So the first ears were raised. They were not elegant at first, repurposed radar dishes, arrays of wire and ingenuity, but they were precious because they were aimed with intention. At Greenbank in West Virginia, at Jodrell Bank in England, at other fields and mesas where engineers and dreamers could bargain for quiet horizons, radio telescopes became new kinds of abbeys, their bells inverted, listening instead of ringing. People pointed them at nearby stars like Tau Ceti and Epsilon Eridani, chosen not for romance but for plausibility. Calm, sun-like, close enough that a patient signal might make the crossing within a human lifetime. Nothing decisive arrived, but the nothings were not empty. They were knowledge about interference and thresholds, about how the earth itself is loud, about how the sky is both generous and mischievous. A moment arrived, decades later, that passed, immediately into folklore of the field. In August of 1977, a volunteer at Ohio State's Big Ear Radio Observatory, a long fixed instrument that let the rotation of Earth sweep the heavens, circled with a pen a spike in the data that stood out like a shout in a library. Next to it he wrote "Wow" in the margin, an annotation half scientific, half human. The signal had the crispness and narrowness of something engineered, appearing near a frequency long considered a cosmic watering hole, a place where natural emissions, a calm and interstellar attention might be practical. It never repeated. That too became part of the lesson. The sky can surprise once and then go quiet. Detection is a courtship that requires patience from both sides, and a single flare of curiosity, however beloved, cannot teach us to speak. The search did not stop at radio. If other intelligences use light in concentrated threads, lasers, we might notice brief, sharp flashes against the background glow. Optical SETI grew a second pair of eyes to complement radio's ears. Telescopes began to blink at high speed, catching the sky not as a continuous field but as a pointerless storm. Photons counted and time-stamped, statistics held in trembling fingers, eyes taught to notice if the stars winked in a way only intention could explain. No certain light message has yet been found, but the act of training ourselves to see the unlikely refined our sight even for the likely. As our own instruments matured, so did our expectations. We moved from hoping for a beacon, an altruistic lighthouse shining "You're not alone" into the night, to considering techno-signatures of a broader, subtler kind. A beacon is generous, it asks nothing but attention. Techno-signatures are indifferent, they are byproducts of a civilization going about its business. Waste heat from large-scale industry, unnatural constellations of satellites that produce specific kinds of sky glow, spectral fingerprints of pollutants that chemistry alone rarely maintains, megastructures that shade a star and make its light dim and brighten with telltale geometry. These too could whisper that minds have been at work even if those minds did not intend to say hello. Our telescopes learn to watch for odd dimming, for transit shapes that do not match planets' tidy curves, for spectral cocktails hard to mix without factories or forests unusually busy. Projects gathered under banners, some public, some private, some stitched together by volunteers whose home computers would donate their idle hours to sift the celestial sands. A long hum of effort grew into something like an orchestra. Big dishes retuned to sweep more of the sky, arrays that could stare at thousands of stars at once, algorithms trained to tell birdsong from wind, archives swelled. Where once a graduate student might examine a night's data by hand, now rivers of bits fed machine learning models that could absorb years of sky in a morning and point out the oddities with a curator's finger. The instruments improved, the patience deepened. A delicate problem haunts the thresholds of SETI like mist along a river. Earth is noisy. Our own technology shouts into the same bands we hope are quiet enough for whispers to carry. The hum of power lines, the chatter of satellites, the pulse of radar, the casual leak of devices. These form a chorus our telescopes must learn to subtract. Interference mitigation becomes a craft. Observatories are sited in radio-quiet zones where phone towers are banished and microwaves are contraband. Software learns to recognize the fingerprints of terrestrial mischief and set them aside without throwing away the baby's cry with the bathwater. There is humility in this. Before we can claim to hear another, we must first learn to hear ourselves and stand a little apart. As the catalogues of exoplanets grew, SETI found a map rather than a compass. We no longer aim only at nearby sun-like stars, we aim at places with known worlds. We concentrate on temperate super-Earths and sub-Neptunes where atmospheres might be present, on rocky planets in habitable zones, on unusual systems where architecture hints at history. A past approach, broadcast your message widely and hope someone is listening, softened into a newer practice. Listen first where life is most plausible, where chemistry has a stage upon which to become story. The synergy with astrobiology became a thread through the tapestry. Spectrographs search for biological gases while radio and optical watchers, ears pricked, keep vigil for the even rarer accident of intention. All the while, the conversation about how to listen matured into the equally tender conversation about whether and when to speak. Messaging extraterrestrial intelligence, METI, has its own weather and etiquette. Some argue that a greeting, frank and kind, is a signature of our species at its best. Others point out that in a universe where we cannot measure the temperament of our neighbours, anonymity is not cowardice, but prudence. This debate holds something precious in it. Our first attempts at diplomacy in a cosmos where the other delegations have not yet announced their arrival. For now, listening remains the dominant practice. Not because we are afraid, though fear is a completely human guest in the room, but because listening is the beginning of understanding. Underneath the hardware and policy, the search carries an intimacy that is easy to miss amid the acronyms. People who tune receivers at 3 a.m. are practicing a kind of attention most of us reserve for newborns and night seas. They are training themselves to distinguish the ordinary from the rare, not as treasure hunters, but as naturalists. The sky is an ecosystem of signals, most of them born without intention, all of them instructive. To study it is to consent to long seasons of not yet, to find joy in persistence rather than outcome. If one day a signal does arrive that passes every filter, that repeats, that points not to a satellite glitch or a high-flying aircraft, but to a star, a planet, a night in which someone else was also awake, well, then, the years of listening will have been practice not only for recognition but for gratitude. The scientific context of this listening is both stern and generous. We must be ruthless with false positives, narrow-band spikes that resolve into terrestrial echoes, drifting tones that align too neatly with a known satellite's path, bursts at a suspiciously human cadence. Confirmation must be multi-sited, repeatable, patient. We must also be generous with hypotheses, designing searches that do not assume others will be like our yesterday. Instead of one narrow band, sweep 1,000. Instead of one instrument, train many and cross-check. Instead of one kind of techno-signature, consider dozens and build tools to notice the unexpected. The discipline SETI teaches is not merely the discipline of hope, but the discipline of surprise. If a message comes, what then? Here our instruments are less prepared than our philosophies. A true signal, structured, sustained, compelling, would become the most scrutinized phenomenon in scientific history. Observatories would pivot. The world would briefly feel small and collectively awake. Yet the message might be beyond our ability to decode. It might carry content we cannot recognize as content because we do not share reference frames, senses, or urgency. It might be nothing but rhythm, proof of intention, and nothing more. Or it might be a library compressed into mathematics, waiting for us to ask the right question in the right language. We should be ready for the possibility that contact, even at a distance, is not a conversation in the cinematic sense, but a recognition. A mirror placed at a new angle, showing us that mind can happen in more than one place, and that the universe is old enough to have witnessed such miracles more than once. The symbolism of SETI is almost painfully transparent and still lovely to consider. To sit in the dark and listen is an act of faith, not in any creed, but in the premise that attention matters. That premise holds in a nursery, in a marriage, in a forest, on a coastline at dawn, and in a control room at 2 a.m, when a young scientist, warmed by coffee and stubbornness, watches the data flow and chooses, yet again, to care. SETI is science, yes. Equations judiciously applied to trace noise, but it is also an ethic, that we share a cosmos with others or we do not, and either way the appropriate response is reverent curiosity. If no voice arrives, the listening will not have been in vain, because we will have learned the shape of our local quiet with exquisite detail. If a voice arrives, the listening will have prepared us to hear without panic, without presumption, with the humility to treat the unknown as a guest rather than a trophy. There is a smaller symbolism too, one that presses thumb to wrist and feels for a pulse. On a blue planet around a modest star, a species that once mapped the heavens with myths now maps them with numbers, yet keeps the myths as a second, softer map for the parts that numbers do not touch. We build mirrored dishes and algorithms not to dominate the sky but to commune with it. That word feels extravagant, and yet what else shall we call a practice that begins with awe and proceeds with care? In this sense, SETI is our rehearsal for meeting difference with attention rather than fear. It is a school where the lessons are patience, precision, and the refusal to make ourselves the measure of all things. The data keep falling like snow through a cone of light. Months fold into years, instruments age, new ones awaken. We have not, as of this night, found a signal that compels a new chapter in the human story. We may be early. We may be isolated by distance, by timing, by temperament, by misaligned senses. Or we may be on the cusp of a moment our descendants will tell as a legend. The night the sky answered back with a pattern no storm or pulsar could account for. The hour when we learned that the word "we" had always been larger than we knew. Whatever tomorrow brings, the search presses us toward a more interior frontier. Every time a dish turns to a star, a quieter question leans forward in its chair. What is it truly that we are asking for? A signal would be an answer to a scientific query, yes, but it would also be a reply to something more private. We are asking whether meaning extends beyond our shores, whether the urge to make pattern, to reach, to wonder is a local wind or a cosmic climate. We are asking whether there are other minds to share the burden and joy of being awake in a universe that does not explain itself. And so, we come to the threshold that waits beyond research schedules and observing proposals. The listening has its own dignity, and the machines their own beauty, but the heart of the matter is older and simpler. The desire to connect, to place oneself in a story larger than one's own chapter, to look up and feel not smaller, but held. If we do not find that feeling in an answer from the stars, we may still find it in the very act of searching together, across languages, across disciplines, across nights, holding a shared silence like a candle. Beyond this room of instruments, another room opens, quieter still. It is not lined with dishes or screens, but with questions that have no electrical power source and need none. What would discovery change in us? What does our listening say about who we are, even if no one answers? Are we seeking confirmation of company, or permission to believe that meaning is not a closed economy, that it is abundant as starlight? The quest for signals leads gently to the quest for significance. Let us carry the hum of the receivers with us as we cross that threshold. The machinery can rest for a while, the mind cannot. Ahead lies a landscape where science and philosophy share a table, where the question of life elsewhere becomes a mirror held up to our own, with kindness, with patience, with the courage to remain in wonder. Chapter 6. The meaning of life in the cosmos. The night has grown deeper, and with it the questions grow softer, as if they prefer our company when our voices are low. We have wandered from scale to scale, stars to worlds, chemistries to customs of listening. And now we stand in a clearing where the sky feels close enough to lean against. Here the instruments dim, the spreadsheets fold, and a gentler inquiry steps forward. What truly are we seeking when we ask whether life exists beyond Earth? The science is earnest and exacting, but underneath it moves an older desire, one that breathes with our sleeping bodies and wakes whenever we look up. The wish for meaning large enough to hold us. Meaning wears many clothes. It is a practical garment in the morning, helping us decide what to do with our days. It is ceremonial at thresholds, birth, love, loss, when we ask for words that do not fray under touch. It is invisible on most afternoons, woven quietly into habit. And it is astronomical, vast, austere and tender when we dare to ask whether consciousness is local weather or a climate shared across the universe. In that astronomical mood, the question of extraterrestrial life becomes a mirror, angling our gaze back toward ourselves even as it points us outward. If we're not alone, then mind is not an accident but a property that the universe permits in more than one place. If we are alone, then mind is a rare lantern, and its stewardship becomes a devotion. History reminds us that we have stood at such thresholds before, and that our answers mature as our vantage widens. Once, Earth was the centre, and certainty was comfortable. Then we learned we circled a star, that our star lived in a galaxy, that our galaxy shared the sky with others, each revelation a gentle untethering. With every widening we were tempted to feel smaller, yet something else happened, something most maps cannot show. Our compassion grew in proportion to the scale we perceived. To know ourselves not as the axis but as a participant encouraged humility, which in turn encouraged care. The cosmos did not diminish us, it recontextualized us. Meaning shifted from being granted by position to being practiced by attention. That shift continues when we consider life beyond Earth. If other minds exist, curious, reflective, capable of wonder, then meaning is not confined to one shoreline. It proliferates like tide pool life after the storm, inventing itself wherever conditions allow. We might never meet these others, never trade stories in the clear, but their existence alone would fold our narrative into something communal. The word we would stretch, not to erase difference, but to make room for an abundance of ways to be awake. The recognition would carry obligations as all kinship does, to treat our world with a tenderness due a rare example, to treat our quests, our conflicts, our technologies as letters someone else might one day read, to become, even in isolation, the kind of neighbour we hope to find. If, by contrast, life is rare to the point of singularity, meaning does not evaporate, it intensifies. A universe with only one garden does not scold the garden for being alone. It asks the gardener to keep the gates open and the soil generous. Our archives, our art, our careful measurements and clumsy reconciliations would become, in such a reading, the only library consciousness has produced, a thought that is both bracing and ennobling. We would owe our descendants not merely survival, but the chance to inherit a world where tenderness is a skill and not a rumour. The task would be local and vast at once, to hold a planet steady long enough for its thinking species to grow wiser than its appetites. Between these poles, abundance and singularity, lies a continuum where the question of meaning becomes less a verdict and more a craft. Perhaps life is frequent but mind is intermittent. Perhaps minds are many but far apart. Perhaps intelligence blooms like alpine flowers where conditions are exacting, brief and exquisite. Whatever the distribution, our response is similar. to shape our days so that curiosity and care reinforce each other, to use our sciences not only to know, but to understand, and to let our myths, those soft tools for carrying the unsayable, remain companions rather than superstitions. In this craft, astronomy and ethics are not strangers. The way we look at the sky influences the way we live under it. Consider the echoes we already hear on Earth. A forest, left to itself, is a parliament, roots trading messages through mycorrhizal threads, canopies negotiating light, watersheds pooling consensus. A reef is a city without arrogance, every architecture provisional, every failure compost. The meaning we derive from these places is not an abstraction, it is instruction. The cosmos is not a forest or a reef, but it too is threaded with relationships. Star to planet, planet to moon, chemistry to weather, time to change. When we seek life elsewhere, we're asking whether the universe, like Earth, prefers conversations to monologues. If it does, then meaning might be what arises wherever systems learn to listen to themselves and one another. There is a temptation to make discovery carry too much. We imagine a signal arriving, and with it, a cascade of transformations, conflict dissolving, parliaments sobered, religions revising with grace, classrooms filling with a new civics of the cosmic. It is a beautiful fantasy, and perhaps fairness requires that we admit a more human probability. We will be ourselves, only more so. Some will feel relief, others anxiety. Some will claim the sky as proof of their prior convictions, others will feel convictions loosen. Markets will tremble and then settle. Poets will write. Children will ask better questions than their elders. Nothing will be simpler, much will be clarified. Meaning will not be delivered like a parcel. It will continue to be made at the kitchen table, in the lab, in the quiet decisions that never make news. The announcement will be a bell. The building of a life afterward will still be patient carpentry. If no message comes, we will not be abandoned. We will go on making disclosure for ourselves, discoveries of patience, of technique, of gentler policies toward rivers and air. We will continue to do what life has always done, convert energy and time into structure and story. And in that ongoing labour, the search itself offers an ethic. Attend, refine, persist. Attention keeps us from cruelty by refusing to look away. Refinement keeps us from arrogance by inviting revision. Persistence keeps us from despair by uniting us in a long task no one lifetime can complete. This is not consolation prize rhetoric. It is the marrow of culture. Meaning also has a sensory dimension we forget at our desks. It is not only arguments and theories, it is the feel of night wind on the wrist, the smell of rain at the observatory's threshold, the click of a relay when a dish aligns, the hush that follows a child's question. In those textures we notice that significance is not always sensational. Most of the universe is slow. Even when it is violent, it acts in rhythms that dwarf our calendars. To live under such a sky is to be tutored in patience. The habitability we described for worlds, moderation, renewal, protection without stagnation, has its counterpart in human life. We can make our societies more habitable by similar means, by balancing energy with restraint, by building shields that do not become prisons, by designing cycles that remember to replenish what they consume. The great paradox of seeking meaning in the cosmos is that it returns us to the local with improved eyesight. Stand in a garden at dusk. The leaves move in a grammar older than agriculture. A moth makes a small errand of light between flowers. Somewhere a city hums, somewhere else, waves make their low opinion of permanence known. All of it is composed of stardust rehearsed into arrangement by gravity and chance and the astonishing persistence of certain loops of chemistry. When we say we are the universe becoming conscious of itself, we're not indulging in flattery, we're acknowledging a responsibility. Consciousness is not a crown, it is a hospice shift, a stewardship vigil, a promise to stay up late while the rest sleeps and to keep the fire tended. If we discovered life elsewhere, microbial or marvellous, we would learn new metaphors for endurance. Microbes teach thrift, forests teach governance, reefs teach collaboration, extremophiles teach audacity. An alien biosphere would teach something we do not yet know we need. Perhaps it would teach us how to count time differently, to measure progress in centuries of replenished soil rather than quarterly metrics. Perhaps it would teach us how to compose technology that fits within cycles rather than rupturing them. Perhaps it would teach us how to listen for intention without assuming human form is its only vessel. There is, inevitably, a question that gathers at the horizon of meaning. What are we for? The cosmos does not answer in the language of purpose. Stars burn because physics demands it. Rivers run downhill because gravity insists. Purpose is a story that minds tell to align their efforts across time. That does not make it false, it makes it powerful. We can choose a purpose that is small and shrill, or we can choose one that is wide and quiet. A wide purpose might be phrased like this: to increase the resilience and depth of life, its beauty, its justice, its capacity to learn, wherever we are. It is not a purpose unique to Earth, nor contingent on extraterrestrial confirmation. It is the work of making things more likely to flourish, and of celebrating flourishing when we find it. In such a purpose, science and tenderness stop pretending to be strangers. To measure an exoplanet's atmosphere is to practice care at light years. To restore a watershed is to practice astronomy of the local. To keep faith with future listeners, the ones who may inherit our dishes and our questions, is to leave them breathable air and instruments that still work, archives that are well indexed and minds trained to read them. Meaning, here, becomes something one generation hands to another, the way a sailor hands a line, with instruction, with stories of storms, with jokes for the doldrums, and if, one night, a rhythm comes through the static, a structured semaphore, a patient sequence, the precise excess that nature rarely affords, what will it change in the marrow of this purpose? Perhaps less than we think. We will add a new practice, hospitality at the scale of light years. We will learn to speak carefully across distances and differences that make diplomacy at home look simple. We will discover the humility of not being the first or only. But the work of making Earth more habitable, of making our politics more porous to truth, our economies more obedient to limits, our technologies more graceful, will remain. The sky will have given us a mirror. It will not absolve us of our chores. There is symbolism in this that refuses to be coy. The search for life is the search for kin. The search for meaning is the search for ways to live like kin even without proof. In both, patience is the instrument, wonder the voltage, humility the fuse that keeps the circuit safe. We do not need to solve the universe to be at home in it. We need to behave as if home is something we make together, with each other, with future strangers, with the unseen. This too is a techno-signature. Not a spectrum line or a dimming star, but a civilization that learns to align power with mercy. The hour is late. The receivers somewhere are still turning. The sea somewhere is still pulling at the moon. Here, breath gathers into a comfortable rhythm. We have asked the cosmos a question and discovered, as always, that it asks us one in return. Will you live as if meaning is abundant? Will you practice attention even when no answer comes? Will you tend the small fires quietly as a courtesy to whatever other lights may be watching? Beyond this clearing lies one last meadow of the night, a place for farewells, the gentle kind that do not close a door but draw a curtain against the cool and promise that morning will find us rested. We will carry our questions there and set them down beside others, older and kinder. We will not force conclusions, we will let the silence do its work, and then, with gratitude for the long company of stars, we will lie back, breathe with the world, and release the day. Come, let us walk into that soft meadow together. The winds are low, the constellations have taken their familiar places. The last chapter waits with a small lamp in the window. Chapter 7. The Meadow of Farewell. The night has thinned to its purest hush. Stars hang like patient thoughts above the dark line of the hills, and the air has that tender, almost absent weight that arrives before dawn. You can hear the soft architecture of the world, the leaf stir, a distant train folding itself into the horizon, the quiet tick of your own breath keeping time. We have wandered far together, across scales that unspooled beyond numbers, into oceans sealed in ice, through radioscapes of static and hope, and finally into the slow room where meaning sits with its lamp turned low. Now the path brings us here, to a small clearing where goodbyes are gentle and nothing needs to hurry. Consider what the night has offered. The universe, immense yet intimate, balances abundance with patience. It cradles countless stars and perhaps countless chances, some worlds only stone and wind, others rehearsing the old miracle of chemistry learning to remember itself. We listened for signals and found, in the waiting, a discipline that dignifies our curiosity. We traced the grammar of habitability and discovered its reflection in our own lives. Moderation, renewal, protection without prison, cycles that remember to give back what they take. Whether the sky is full of neighbours or only of weather, the work before us remains, to tend this blue shoreline kindly, to make our brief lamp worth seeing from afar. If an answer comes from a distant emitter, from a spectrum bent into unlikely chords, from a veil of living lace beneath an alien ice, it will not erase the quiet you feel now. It will join it. Meaning does not arrive like thunder. It gathers the way dew does on every surface that has learned to cool and welcome the morning. And if no answer comes, we will still have practiced the better part of conversation. Attention without demand, wonder without ownership, patience without fear. In the long calendar of light years, such virtues are not small, they are exactly the size required. So rest your thoughts, let the questions untie their knots and become simple again. Somewhere, a radio dish keeps vigil. Somewhere, a tide turns under a moon that was once molten fire. Here, you're a listener among listeners, a breath among breaths, and that is more than enough. If these quiet journeys have kept you company, if they have softened the edges of a hard day, know that your presence has been felt with gratitude. Should you wish to return, the path will remember your steps, the stories will be here, unhurried and warm. And now we dim the lamp. The constellations go on with their slow conversations, and the earth, a patient sailor, leans toward dawn. May your sleep be deep and your waking kind. May you carry into the bright hours the steadiness of the night and the spaciousness of the sky. And so, as the last echoes fade into the dark, we leave these mysteries behind, quietly, gently. The world sleeps, and we drift with it. Good night.